I've done this week through the great universities of Europe, United States, finished Stanford last night, and I'm trying to improve this presentation. It's presented as scientific clickbait, but it's a seriously scientific presentation. Taken Prime Minister Modi's hand and said, you're not going to have blood on your finger. You're going to have blood all the way up your arm. If you don't act. We don't have any more time now. I'm not using predictive science on the right. Some happen. So all it is a thermometer with a bulb at the bottom full of mercury. Put a wet rag around the bulb. Put the rag back on with humidity. It stays hot. The evaporative. It's a, so what are they? Yeah. Okay, so just to say these are some of the references, they're from all over the world, and we're building them all the time. Sorry about this is going so well. And it'll give you time just to absorb that we're these are some of the reference pages. And you're welcome to look them up and verify this presentation. But let me just quickly move on. I just can't believe you contribute so heavily to global warming. I mean, you know you're the problem, don't you? No, actually you're not. You're right. To know that when you go to pick up the kids, you're not destroying those very humans you're picking up. That's your right. You're here to hold people to account. This greenwash that is the public's fault just means no one's at fault. Wow. That got the fossil fuel community off, that got policymakers off, that got Andrew Forrest head off the chopping block. But people are at fault. People are culpable. If you're thinking, when things get really rough, because we did nothing, that there should be a whole list of people, say 1,000 people who should maybe put. We know what it is. We know what is causing the mega fires and floods. We know that we lost and will lose 40 to 70 times the safe standard. People wondering if they could take their next breath. Preterm births like birthplace due to fire and smoke. Here with farms in New South Wales, I remember her complaining to me, just can't get enough stock on the farms to get down the grass. We're looking at now La Nina coming dry. We're literally setting it up, if you don't tell me.
You remember them?
Yeah, yeah, but I need this to go out. So we put it back in. So last month alone yield was 1.75. And I need everyone to realise that you are really standing on the precipice of mammalian demise, that you cannot handle high humidity with rising temperature. And of course there's a huge source. The hotter it gets, the more the vapour. These events can happen anywhere. So you know it's greenhouse gas, and this is why we spend a bit of time with HUB, because they really are across the biological science of humidity. Humidity starts sloshing through your system, you get a pounding headache, vomiting. This is really well documented human science, ladies and gentlemen. Within hours, minutes to hours, we start to reach a point. Your next part of your short journey to end of life is hallucinations, seizures and coma, heart attack, your organs fail. If you made it to hospital, anyone here go to hospital for COVID? Very lucky, I did. Everyone, I went to COVID hospital in Switzerland, everyone in the hospital had COVID. Everyone walked out, not with lethal humidity. You literally have a pump put into your system to take out the blood as quickly as possible. It's put through a refrigerator, put the point in. But I didn't have to defend it at all, because his three scientists waited straight and said, this is happening. 1.5 degrees, you're in it. 2 degrees, it's getting worse. Heat waves in the middle of summer, January, February. They benchmarked spaghetti last month. Now, I've got the detection system picked it up, but in India, say, they're rushing to get coal to their coal-fired power stations because we don't now have time to argue. We have to act. No matter where you are in the world. I had a discussion with a friend of ours, Jane in Iceland, and she said, well, I'm fine. I'm in Iceland. Have you read the name of my country? Iceland. I said, and how do you survive? She said, well, on trade. I said, well, you're toast. We're not an oil and gas complex system. We're not trying to take energy from way below the bowels of the earth and then work out how to not do $1 million since we started construction some years ago. As we roll out the $6.2 billion, because it's plug and play, we're going to save $3 billion in not burning fossil fuel. Our net investment is $3.2 billion. But now we're not burning 1 billion litres of
Thanks so much. Dr. Forrest has kindly agreed to stay, and I think we've got many of...
One of the things that I'm grappling with at the moment is that almost every solar panel in this country has probably used modern slavery, and clearly we need to get that, clearly we need solar desperately for climate, no shadow of a doubt there. But with the US law where they've prohibited imports from China because of suspected forced prison labour, how do you balance that? How do we come to a position where we're not choosing between modern slavery versus addressing climate change?
Yeah, so look, it's a really, really good question. The whole of China isn't under question at all. There's a subset of China which is under question. So how we do it, we have the largest modern slavery group in the world is Walk Free. How we do it is if our companies cannot do full audit on the supply chains of each of our suppliers, then they're blacklisted. Not just for us, we let everyone know this company in Xinjiang or wherever do not allow you to do audits. So fundamental, we don't care what language you speak, where you're from, what colour. If you allow us to fully audit to our satisfaction, not yours, then we are satisfied that we can procure from your supply chains. We're pushing hard to get solar panel established here in Australia, North America, etc. But I wouldn't write off all of China because there's 99% of China who really have a deep revulsion to any type of forced labour. And the other 1% just aren't identified yet. But all I can say, the majority of people would not put up with it. We as Fortescue have 4 principles. One is no modern slavery. One is no forced marriage, no child marriage, and equal education outcomes for boys and girls. Where we're satisfied they can be met or legislation is being enforced that it will be met, then we're happy to invest in those countries. That's how we do it.
Anyone else? Francois. Francois is a hydrant.
Thank you very much for the great talk. Francois Gay from the School of Chemistry, and I'm an expert in hydrogen. Some of the things you mentioned, there are a lot of climate activist groups across the world that have been trying to get this message across for a very long time with little success. And the question has been why they have not been successful, because we are still in a no action plan. And one of the things maybe is that this message is too scary, and there are some scientists that look at the psychology of the brain and how we evolve toward message like this, and this creates a freeze. And so my question to you is really first, because there is also debates around, can industry do the change? And some argues that industry cannot because it's too complex. And second, do you think that your approach is the right approach? And some people start to say that instead of giving this message, we need to start to think about creative solutions because we actually lack creativity in developing solutions.
Yeah, so positive message is a bit like encouragement with your workforce. It works so much better than criticism. And, you know, people say, well, people are blind to negative messaging now, and they'll flick through their handhelds whenever they see something negative, they'll flick through it, flick past it. That's kind of true. they'll also go home and say to their partners, we're not going to have children. So actually, it does sink in a very bad way. My view of this presentation is to be a capitalist, an industrialist, one of the heavy emitters, to step right inside their field as one of them and say, we can change. This is not an academic with a vested interest who really doesn't care. This is not an environmentalist who's out of touch with all your pressures. This is someone who's exactly like you, who's saying it's great for your shareholders if you have the character to change. And we're proving and asking you to do no more than this, that you can change profitably. And so we're stepping into that world where there's been the greatest resistance to change and saying, we're part of you, you can't deny us. And the social media message, which will come after this, under positive power, that has much of what was in this presentation, which is positive, 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 positive. But we want that to go out to the world. For the presentations I'm making, I want to alert policymakers, captains of industry, universities that the time for dithering is finished. We have to act.
Yeah.
Wonderful to have you here, and thank you for the great talk. I'm a biologist and ecologist, and so simultaneously looking at this incredible climate crisis compounding what is already a biodiversity crisis affecting soil fertility, climate regulation, pollination, all of the essential services that we get from biodiversity. What are the policies or the incentives that we can put in place to address both the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis simultaneously, because we're going to have to do so?
So in oceans, you probably know we've pushed very hard to go 30% no take by 2030, and that's really catching fire. It's really working. In the terrestrial environment, I think do what my sister's doing, which is really work hard on having no influence parklands, terrestrial environments which are fully protected within representative ecosystems, not just out in the desert, but where you can really protect the ecosystems which were there. Second, and the really big one, is stop global warming. Stop the emissions being pumped out into the atmosphere. And this I've chosen to establish in this presentation, says why we have to act immediately, but acting immediately is purely drawing on the resource which is lacking most, which is character of leaders, because the solutions are there and they're there now. We just have to move. And asking for proper change. When I was with the leadership of China February this year, saying your 2060 target might have given you an economic advantage, arguably over the United States, because you bought yourself another 10 years over 2050. But all of that's changed. Technology's changed, your automation, your robotics, your ability to create 500 gigawatts a year, say by the latter part of this decade, of renewable energy, compound that over your next 5-year plan, China could go profitably net zero or fully zero by the late 2030s. So these are the really strong arguments of the business community pushing policymakers to act, change the swim lanes from what we have now, which is to burn more and more fossil fuel by the subsidies we have, and change it to incentives to go green. And that is what policymakers, politicians can do, and business leaders should be demanding it.
Thank you. Rico.
Yeah, thank you for this wonderful talk. My name is Rico Merkel. I'm professor in transport and supply chain management at the business school. And I was really fascinated to see how you have electrified your mines. You talk about trains, ships, and then even aircraft. Have you also thought about your downstream sort of supply chains, and specifically, what you do with the iron ore? Is there perhaps that business case? Well, we have heard that the idea before, to do more with the iron ore here in Australia, given that we have so much electric energy here. Is that potentially commercially viable, and have you thought about that?
I think it's really viable. It's really viable. We have a large project called Iron Bridge. It will probably be one of the first major of the large iron operations in Australia where it'll put hydrogen into the ore feed to strip out the excess oxygen so you can have green iron. And we have really serious buyers for those green iron briquettes, from here in Australia and overseas, because it allows them a very short path to have green steel. So I think it is highly viable. We need policies to push us that way. The diesel fuel rebate pushes us dead against that. And there's a compounding other set of policies which make it more profitable to just send your iron ore overseas. But I do think, with the way the world is going, Australia has this wonderful opportunity to quite literally be the Saudi Aramco of renewable energy. If we don't do that, once again, it's not lack of capital, it's not lack of technology, it's lack of character.
I think you've got time for two more, one here, one here.
Andrew, thank you for that talk. Ollie J, Professor of Heat and Health and Director of the Heat and Health Research Incubator here at the University of Sydney. I think the core message of your talk could not be more important, so thank you for that. I'd like to propose that potentially the current approach that you're adopting in terms of forecasting what the impacts are going to be on human health and well-being in the future with different climate change scenarios may actually be conservative, and the impacts may be even greater. I was wondering if you could respond to that, please.
Well, firstly, that's why I go to universities, right? So I need that statement out with your professorial, independent academic basis of truth, so that I don't seem like an alarmist. Okay, so because
We can do that for you.
yeah, I mean, just say, a so-called derogatory term, captain of industry, was here saying we absolutely must change, and his presentation was, it's been called around the world, alarming, but directing. And you can say he kind of underplayed the alarming part, even though it was alarming. So really that is why we go to universities. Yes, I acknowledge that you get a lethal humidity event across a highly populous part of the tropics, or indeed worse, the subtropics, with gravitational spin, ladies and gentlemen. The water vapour is created around the equator, but it spins down to the subtropics where everyone lives, where the food bowls of the world are. And that's where it gets trapped. So yes, it could be a lot worse.
Thank you. And just over here.
The lady in red as well. Yep.
Thank you very much, and definitely I think alarming is a great word for it. I was really curious, I guess the most controversial technology in terms of transition is often carbon sequestration, which is sort of heralded as the way to get to a genuine zero, which didn't come up. I was really curious as to what your thoughts were, as if it has a role or not in our future.
Look, I just think it's a way to propagate the fossil fuel sector. And, as a statistician who did a PhD in ecology, you have to get across these things. If it fails conservatively 9 out of 10 times, then it's disproven. And I see carbon sequestration being ticked off by policymakers as a way to stop, or that dreadful euphemism, carbon sequestration and use. I push it down, might not stay there, just so I can get more oil and gas out. I actually do see it as just like the word net, a really dangerous way to cling to the fossil fuel sector. And it has failed within sight of my family home. You've got the Wheatstone project, an absolute unmitigated disaster. You've got the Norwegian government, let's go from American corporates to really respectable governments. They've stopped talking about their massive carbon sequestration project and they've deferred it. And you ring them up and say, what does that mean? And they say, well, it means deferred, stupid. And I said, yes, but deferred has a timeline. Deferred to when? Well, it's just deferred. I said, well, then you're lying. You mean you've stopped it full stop because it wasn't economic. It was just a way for you to pump out more oil. So, no, I'm not a fan. Direct air capture, I'm a big fan of, but we're in TU Delft University in the Netherlands the other day. This really respectable climate scientist, just brilliant guy. I've read him a lot. And we're in a big room of professors. And he said, you know, Andrew, I was just with Shell the other day, and they're doing direct air capture of carbon for 200,000 tonnes a year. Isn't it wonderful? And I just said, oh my God, you gave them airtime? I mean, care? And now you repeat it in front of this room full of professors? You know, did you ask them, and how many hundreds of millions of tonnes against their 200,000 tonnes are they pumping up into the atmosphere just to get you to miss all that and talk about DAC? So really, we've just got to move away from fossil fuels as quickly as we possibly can. And governments who say it's going to cost a truckload of money, blah, 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 say you've already got the money. You're just incentivising in the wrong places. So that's my simple point. We have the capital, we have the technology, we just need the character now.
Thank you. I'm sure there are many in the room who have additional questions, but I'm also conscious that Dr. Forrest is literally chasing the sun across the country today to meet with other universities and arriving in the country this morning. So for the time you've spent with us, thank you so much. I don't think anybody in the room will disagree with your passion and expertise and the urgency of this problem. And I'm sure everybody in the room agrees with me that it's something on which we must work together. So if there's any way any of us in the room can assist you in this endeavour,
I know, but it's challenging. Not
Yeah, I'm working on brilliant. What, can you give us a brief market? I actually, my project is the and also green carbon. Because we put carbon in green hydrogen, and of course you've got a zero emission substitute for gas. We can use. You shoot me the paper. I was wondering if thank you, Professor. I think actually, I mean, that's out of university. Yeah. We can help. Thank you. Yes. Oh, really? If you want to. Oh, do you? What is you, Jeff? All right. Cheers, you guys. Bye.